The world knows Arab CEOs as symbols of power, wealth, and untouchable pride. Men who build empires out of oil, finance, and technology, commanding respect with every step they take. But what if I told you that one of the richest CEOs in the Middle East made a decision so unthinkable that it shocked everyone around him? In the heart of Dubai, inside the golden towers where luxury cars roar and fortunes are made overnight, a billionaire stopped his convoy to look at someone the world had abandoned, an elderly man, frail, broken, and covered in lice. While others turned their heads in disgust, this CEO did something no one expected. He brought the old man into his life, into his world. What started as an act of charity would soon uncover secrets that neither of them could have imagined, leading to a truth that money could never buy. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that will open your heart and challenge what you believe about power, wealth, and humanity. Because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about compassion and the true meaning of strength. The streets of Dubai were alive that evening, painted with the reflection of neon lights on glass towers and the faint hum of luxury engines that prowled the boulevards. To the wealthy who lived inside the glittering skyscrapers, poverty was invisible, something left outside their tinted windows, a world that did not belong to them. Yet for Khalid Al-Rahman, the 45-year-old CEO of one of the largest conglomerates in the Middle East, the contrast between opulence and suffering would strike like a thunderbolt that night. Khalid was the image of power. Tall, broad-shouldered, his trimmed beard laced with silver that only heightened his dignity, he wore a tailored suit worth more than most men's yearly wages. His convoy, a line of black SUVs with tinted glass, moved like shadows across Sheikh Zayed Road. Inside his vehicle, Khalid sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the world outside. He was returning from a shareholders' meeting where billions had been discussed like casual figures on paper. But as his car slowed at a traffic light near an older district, his gaze caught something no one else bothered to see. On the corner, hunched under the flickering glow of a broken street lamp, sat an old man. His clothes were tattered, the color faded to something unrecognizable. His hair, long and matted, clung to his scalp like damp straw, and his frail hands scratched repeatedly at his skin. He looked more ghost than human, skin hanging loosely over bones, eyes sunken, his entire presence radiating neglect and decay. The stench of misery seemed to surround him, and the passers-by stepped around him as though he were an obstacle, not a man. "Sir, don't look," his driver muttered, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror. "Such men, they carry disease. Not safe." But Khalid did not turn away. Instead, something stirred within him, an echo of memories from his childhood, when his own grandfather had fallen ill and been cast aside by relatives who considered weakness a shame. He had sworn then, as a boy of 15, that no one under his care would ever be abandoned. Now, staring at this stranger, frail and scratching as lice crawled in his beard, Khalid felt the old vow burn in his chest. "Stop the car," he ordered. The driver froze. "Sir?" I said, "Stop the car." The convoy of SUVs halted, their sleek frames a jarring contrast to the broken figure on the sidewalk. The bodyguards shifted uneasily, scanning the surroundings for threats. But Khalid ignored their murmurs. He stepped out, the desert night air warm against his face, and walked toward the old man. Each step felt heavier, as though the wealth of his empire weighed less than the human sorrow before him. The old man lifted his head. His eyes, clouded but alive, locked with Khalid's. For a moment, time seemed to pause, the world reduced to two men from opposite extremes of life. One surrounded by riches, the other swallowed by destitution. "Leave me," the old man rasped, his voice hoarse, filled with defeat. "People like you don't touch people like me." Khalid crouched down, ignoring the gasps of his guards. Up close, the sight was even more unbearable. The man's scalp was alive with lice, crawling shamelessly across his skin. His nails were yellow and cracked from endless scratching. His shirt was torn open, revealing bruises and scars no one had cared to treat. And yet, beneath the filth and degradation, Khalid saw something, dignity not fully extinguished, a spark of humanity buried under the ruin. "What is your name?" Khalid asked gently. The old man hesitated. His lips trembled as though the question itself was foreign. Finally he whispered, Yusuf. Khalid nodded. If tonight, you are not alone. The guards tried to intervene. Sir, this is madness. We cannot put him in your car. He is sick, he could be dangerous. But Khalid's voice was firm, cutting through their panic like steel. I said he comes with me. If any of you have a problem with that, you can leave my service now. There was silence. No one dared defy him. Slowly, Khalid removed his jacket, a garment worth thousands, and draped it over the frail shoulders of Yusuf. The old man flinched at the unexpected kindness, his watery eyes widening in disbelief. For perhaps the first time in decades, someone had touched him without disgust. Tears welled in the creases of his eyes, carving new paths through the dirt on his face. Why would you do this? Yusuf stammered. Because I can, Khalid replied softly. And because no one else will. He guided the old man into the back of his SUV. The scent of leather and polished wood clashed violently with the stench of lice and decay, but Khalid did not recoil. Instead, he sat beside him, ignoring the discomfort of his staff. The convoy resumed its path, this time carrying not only a billionaire but a forgotten soul pulled from the shadows. As the city lights faded and the cars drove toward Khalid's private estate, the CEO leaned back and studied the man beside him. He could feel the unease in the air, the tension of his choice. What would the world say if they saw him like this? What would the board members think, the newspapers, the politicians who shook his hand daily? But Khalid did not care. For the first time in years, he felt something money had never given him, a sense of purpose untainted by profit. Yet beneath the warmth of his decision, he could not shake the feeling that this choice would lead him into uncharted territory, pulling him into a story far bigger than he had intended. And as the convoy disappeared into the desert road, Yusuf whispered words that Khalid would never forget. You don't know what you've brought into your house. The sentence lingered in the air, heavy, foreboding, like the opening of a door Khalid wasn't sure he should have unlocked. The estate of Khalid al-Rahman stretched like a hidden kingdom in the desert, its marble walls and towering arches glowing faintly under the moonlight. Guards opened the iron gates as the convoy rolled inside. The SUVs parked neatly by the grand entrance, where servants in crisp uniforms rushed forward to greet their master. But the moment they saw the frail, filthy man being helped out of the vehicle, their rehearsed courtesies died in their throats. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, whispers traveling like wildfire. Their employer, one of the most powerful CEOs in the Middle East, was leading a half-starved old man, covered in lice, through the polished marble steps of his mansion. Prepare a room for him, Khalid ordered firmly. Sir? The head butler hesitated, horrified at the thought. He cannot stay here. It is unsafe. He could carry. I said, Khalid cut in, his voice a command carved from steel, prepare a room for him. And not the servants' quarters. I want him in the east wing. Clean sheets. Hot water. Food. Medicine. Do it now. The butler bowed his head, retreating quickly, though his eyes betrayed disbelief. Yusuf staggered, clutching the jacket that hung loosely on his shoulders. His body shook as though he could not accept the comfort being forced upon him. I don't belong here, he muttered, his voice trembling. Look at these walls, look at this place. This is not for men like me. Khalid guided him inside, ignoring the polished marble floors, the golden chandeliers, the oil paintings of ancestors who had ruled commerce like kings. Tonight it is, he said quietly. You belong because I say you do. The old man was led to a room larger than any space he had likely occupied in decades. The walls were draped with silk curtains, the bed tall and wide, covered in linen so white it seemed untouched by human hands. But what caught Yusuf's attention most was the bathroom. He stared at the gleaming porcelain tub filled with steaming water, the bottles of soap lined neatly on the counter. His cracked lips quivered. I can't, his voice broke. I cannot touch this. It isn't meant for me. Khalid's gaze softened. It is. And you will. Because you are not an animal, Yusuf. You are a man. Hours later, the servants had done as instructed. They burned the old rags he had worn, shaved his tangled hair, scrubbed away the grime of years, and treated the infestation that had consumed his skin. When Khalid returned to check, Yusef was sitting in fresh cotton robes, his beard trimmed, his face tired but visible at last. Beneath the scars and age, he looked human again. Yet something else stirred in Khalid as he observed the transformation. Yusef's eyes, sharp, cautious, did not resemble the eyes of a helpless beggar. They were eyes that had seen too much, eyes that carried secrets. "You should rest," Khalid said, but Yusef's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Why are you doing this?" Khalid paused. "Because no one else would." "That's not the truth." Yusef leaned forward, his frail fingers tightening on the armrest. "You could have walked past me like everyone else. But you didn't. Men like you, they don't make choices without reason. What do you expect from me?" The question lingered like smoke. For a moment, Khalid felt exposed, stripped of the clarity he usually carried in business. He had saved Yusef out of instinct, out of a vow to himself, but now he wondered, was there a deeper reason? "I expect nothing," Khalid answered finally, though the doubt lingered in his chest. Over the following days, Khalid's decision began to ripple through his empire. At the office, his board of directors whispered behind closed doors. "Why is the CEO housing a diseased vagrant?" one asked. "Investors will not approve of such eccentric behavior." At dinner parties, rumors spread quickly. The billionaire had lost his mind, taking in a madman from the streets. Was he trying to polish his public image, or had grief and loneliness finally broken him? But inside the mansion, something undeniable was unfolding. Yusef, though frail, began to speak with a clarity that surprised Khalid. When asked simple questions, his answers carried wisdom rooted in pain. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Khalid confessed, "You remind me of my grandfather. He was once strong, feared by all, yet when he grew weak, everyone abandoned him." "And you carry that wound still," Yusef said. "It is not me you are trying to save. It is him. It is the boy inside you who watched helplessly as your elder faded away." Khalid froze, struck by the precision of the words. No one had ever dared to speak to him like that. He was used to flattery, to silence, to people circling him like shadows. But this frail man, whom the world had discarded, looked straight into his soul. The silence stretched until Khalid admitted, "Perhaps you are right. Perhaps saving you is a way of saving him." Yusef's thin lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then maybe saving me will save you as well." But even as the bond between them deepened, shadows grew outside their walls. One evening, a call came from a rival businessman, thinly veiled with mockery. "I hear you have a new guest, Alman. A beggar in your palace. Tell me, does he sit at your table now too?" Khalid's jaw tightened. He ended the call without a word. But he knew the storm was coming. In a world where power was perception, his choice could unravel his reputation. Yet when he returned to the East Wing and found Yusef praying quietly, his frail frame bowing on the prayer rug, Khalid felt a certainty stir within him. Whatever secrets this man carried, whatever consequences would follow, he could not abandon him. Not now. Still, Yusef's words from the first night haunted him, echoing in the silence of the mansion. "You don't know what you've brought into your house." And Khalid knew, with growing unease, that the old man was right. The morning sun cut through the palace curtains like golden blades, casting light across the marble floors of the East Wing. Khalid al-Rahman stood silently in the doorway, watching as Yusef stirred awake. The old man's face, though cleaned and restored, still carried scars of suffering too deep to be erased by soap and water. "Sleep well?" Khalid asked, his tone deliberately light. Yusef sat up slowly, his joints stiff, his eyes darting around as if unsure whether he was still welcome. "Better than I deserve," he muttered. "You deserve more than the streets," Khalid replied, stepping closer. But before Yusef could answer, a loud knock echoed through the halls. The butler entered, his face tight with discomfort. "Sir, the board has arrived," he said carefully. "They insist on speaking with you immediately." Khalid gave a curt nod. "Prepare the study." Moments later, the grand room filled with his most trusted directors, men in suits tailored to perfection, their eyes sharp, their mouths curved into polite but poisonous smiles. At the head of the table, Khalid took his place. One of them leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Khalid, we are deeply concerned. The newspapers are already circling rumors. They say you have brought a deranged old man into your home. Investors are asking questions. They fear instability." "Investors fear everything," Khalid said coldly. "That is why they cling to me. Because I do not fear." Another spoke, harsher. "This is not about courage. It is about image. A CEO of your stature cannot afford to be seen with a diseased beggar under his roof. What if he is dangerous? What if he has a criminal past?" Khalid's eyes hardened. "He has a name. Yusuf. And as long as he is in my house, he is under my protection. This meeting is over." The men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances, but no one dared challenge him further. Not directly. That evening, Khalid returned to the East Wing. He found Yusuf seated by the fire, staring into the flames with a faraway look. "They don't want me here," Yusuf said quietly without turning. Khalid raised an eyebrow. "You heard?" "I don't need to hear," Yusuf replied. "I've seen enough men like them in my life. Power makes them blind, and fear makes them cruel." For a moment, Khalid wondered how much truth lay behind those words. He studied the old man, his posture, his choice of words. He wasn't just any beggar. There was history etched into his voice, wisdom carved by battles unseen. "Who were you before all this?" Khalid asked carefully. Yusuf didn't answer right away. His hands trembled slightly, gripping the edge of the chair. Finally, he said, "A man with a family. A man with land. A man who believed that honor still mattered." He stopped, his throat tightening. "Until it was taken from me." Khalid leaned forward. "By who?" Yusuf's eyes flickered with something sharp, almost dangerous. "By men who sat at tables like yours. Men who wore silk suits and golden watches. Men who smiled as they cut my life into pieces." The silence that followed was heavy, charged. Khalid felt the weight of those words pressing into him. Whoever Yusuf had been, his story was not one of simple poverty. It was one of betrayal, of power crushing the powerless. "You are not safe with me," Yusuf whispered suddenly, his gaze burning into Khalid. "My presence here will draw wolves to your door." "I have fought wolves all my life," Khalid answered firmly. "Let them come." Days passed, and the rumors outside the mansion grew louder. Journalists camped at the gates, snapping photos of the mysterious old man walking the garden with his cane. Online headlines speculated wildly, "Arab billionaire adopts beggar." Al-Rahman's madness, compassion or scandal? But inside, Khalid and Yusuf's bond deepened. The old man began to open up in fragments, telling stories of a lost village, of sons he hadn't seen in decades, of betrayal by those who promised him safety. Khalid listened, his heart stirring with something he hadn't felt in years, empathy unshaped by business, loyalty unbound by contracts. One night, as a desert storm raged outside, lightning striking across the dunes, Yusuf's voice grew sharper. "Do you know why lice covered me when you found me? Because I stopped fighting. I let the world crawl over me, eat me alive. I believed I had no worth left. But then you looked at me. And in your eyes, I remembered the man I used to be." Khalid felt the words pierce through him. He had always been the savior, the master of his empire, but here was a man reminding him of his own humanity. And yet, danger was drawing nearer. One evening, Khalid's phone rang. An anonymous voice hissed through the line. "Throw the old man out, Alan, or you will regret it." Khalid gripped the phone tightly, his jaw clenched. "If you come for him, you come for me." The line went dead. When he returned to the East Wing, Yusuf was waiting as if he already knew. "They're coming," he said. Khalid stared at him, unsettled. Who is coming?" The old man's gaze didn't waver. "The ones who destroyed me. And if you keep me here, they will try to destroy you too." Lightning split the sky outside, thunder shaking the walls. Khalid realized then that this was no act of charity, no random rescue. Fate had brought Yusuf into his life for a reason. And the war that followed would test everything he thought he knew about loyalty, power, and survival. And for the first time in years, Khalid felt a flicker of fear. Not for himself, but for the frail, stubborn old man who had walked out of the shadows and into his home. The storm that night had been more than weather. Khalid al-Rahman could feel it in his bones. The unsettling silence that followed the thunder was the silence of men planning in shadows. By dawn, the first blow struck. The call came from his head of security. "Sir, the financial headquarters in Dubai was breached. Not money, not files. They left a message." Khalid's voice was ice. "What message?" The pause. Then, "Give us the old man." Khalid's chest tightened, his fists curling at his side. He hung up without another word. He already knew what this meant. This wasn't a coincidence. Whoever had destroyed Yusef's life years ago had returned, and now they were targeting him. He walked the east wing in heavy silence, until he found Yusef by the window, staring at the dunes beyond the walls. The old man didn't turn, as if he had heard every word of the call through instinct alone. "You brought their eyes to your empire," Yusef said softly. "No," Khalid replied, his jaw tight. "I brought you into the light. And wolves hate light." Yusef's shoulders slumped. "You don't understand, Khalid. They will not stop. They will burn your wealth, your name, everything you are, until you throw me back into the gutter where they left me." "And what would you have me do?" Khalid's voice rose, uncharacteristically sharp. "Abandon you? Pretend I never saw you? That is not who I am." For the first time, Yusef turned, his old eyes fierce. "Then you must be ready to lose everything." The next days were chaos. Reporters filled the gates. Anonymous threats multiplied. An attack on Khalid's supply chain caused millions in losses overnight. Board members grew louder, demanding Yusef's removal. One evening, during a heated meeting, a director slammed his fist on the table. "Khalid, this is madness. One old man is not worth the destruction of everything you've built. Send him away." Khalid stood, towering over them, his voice steady but burning. "If my empire cannot stand for loyalty, then it is already worthless." He walked out, leaving their silence behind him. Later that night, he found Yusef alone in the library, clutching a worn photograph in his trembling hands. Khalid sat across from him, waiting. Finally, Yusef pushed the picture forward. It showed a younger Yusef, strong, proud, standing with 3 children and a woman whose eyes burned with quiet strength. "My family," he whispered. "I had sons. They came from my land, my people. They lied, promised safety, then took everything. They made us refugees in our own country. And when I tried to fight back, they killed my wife. My sons disappeared. I never found them." Khalid felt the words like knives. He had built his life on wealth and control, but here was a man who had lost everything money could not protect. "Do you know who did this?" Khalid asked. Yusef nodded slowly. "Men like the ones sitting in your boardroom. Foreign investors who called themselves partners, but were vultures. And one of them still lives. A man with scars on his face. They called him Al-Mansur." The name rang in Khalid's ears. Al-Mansur, the rival magnate who had circled his empire for years, waiting for a weakness. Suddenly it all made sense. The next evening, Khalid hosted a gala in his palace, a facade of normalcy meant to calm investors. The chandeliers glittered, champagne glasses clinked, and men in tuxedos exchanged hollow laughter. But beneath the golden light, tension pulsed like a storm about to break. As Khalid walked the room, he felt the weight of every eye. Whispers followed him. Some mocked, others pitied. Yet he kept his head high. Then, across the hall, he saw him, Al-Mansur. A tall man with a thin smile, and yes, a scar slicing across his cheek. He raised his glass toward Khalid in mock respect. Khalid's blood boiled. He crossed the room, his steps deliberate. "Why now, Mansur? Why him?" Al-Mansur's smile widened. "Because you made him matter again. He was a ghost. And you gave him back his name. Now he is leverage. Give him to me, and this war ends." Khalid leaned closer, his voice like steel. "I do not trade lives. Not his. Not anyone's." Al-Mansur's smile faded. "Then watch everything you love burn." Back in the East Wing, Khalid recounted the encounter to Yusuf. The old man sat in silence for a long time, his face unreadable. Finally he said, "You are a fool, Khalid. But perhaps the kind of fool the world needs." That night, Khalid could not sleep. He walked the gardens, the desert winds whipping around him, until he found himself standing beneath the stars, asking questions he had never dared voice. Was he willing to risk his fortune, his legacy, his very life, for an old man whose story was only half revealed? When he returned to the palace, Yusuf was waiting by the fire. His eyes met Khalid's, steady, unflinching. "They will strike soon. And when they do, you must decide if I am worth the empire you built." Khalid sat across from him, and for once, words failed him. All he could do was stare at the man fate had thrown into his world, knowing that every choice ahead would cost something he could never regain. The next morning, the palace gates shook with the roar of engines. A convoy of black cars pulled up, men in dark suits spilling out like shadows. Security scrambled, but the message was clear: the war had arrived at Khalid's doorstep. And for the first time in years, Khalid al-Rahman felt the ground tremble beneath his empire. But he also felt something else: resolve. The palace gates groaned as if they carried the weight of destiny itself. Outside, engines still rumbled, a convoy of black cars lined like wolves in the desert night. Khalid stood at the balcony of the East Wing, staring down at the intruders. His security team scrambled into position, radios buzzing, but the air was charged with something heavier than danger. It was inevitability. "Sir, they're armed," his head of security warned, rushing to his side. "This is not a negotiation. It's an invasion." Khalid's jaw tightened. "Then we will answer with more than words." But even as he said it, his eyes drifted to Yusuf, who stood just behind him, leaning on his cane, fragile yet unshaken. The old man's presence was a contradiction, weak in body, but steady as a mountain in spirit. "They came for me," Yusuf said quietly. "Do not sacrifice your men, your wealth, your life, for a ghost." Khalid turned sharply. "Enough. You are not a ghost. You are the first real thing this empire has ever known." For a moment, their eyes locked, and Yusuf said nothing more. The attack began with glass shattering. Gunfire erupted near the gates, and shouts echoed through the marble halls. Security clashed with the intruders, their boots pounding against the stone floors of the palace. Khalid was led into the secured chamber, but he pushed back against his guards. "I will not hide in my own home," he snapped. "If Al-Mansur thinks he can walk into my palace, then let him see me face to face." His guards hesitated. They had seen this fire in his eyes before, the fire of a man who had built empires from nothing and stared down kings who thought themselves untouchable. Finally, they obeyed. Khalid marched through the grand hall, his polished shoes echoing like war drums. By the time he reached the entrance, the intruders had already forced their way inside. And there he was, Al-Mansur, tall, scarred, smiling like a predator who believed he had already won. "You should have listened," Al-Mansur said, his voice calm, almost mocking. "Hand me the old man, and I will leave your house standing." Khalid didn't flinch. "You mistake me for someone who trades in flesh. I deal in honor. And honor cannot be bought or sold." Al-Mansur's smile faded. His hand lifted, and the men around him raised their weapons. But before the command to fire could be given, a voice rang out from behind Khalid. "Stop!" It was Yusuf. He stepped forward, his cane tapping against the marble, his frail body moving with a dignity that silenced even the armed men. He pushed past Khalid, placing himself directly in the line of fire. "You came for me," Yusuf said, his voice strong despite the years. "Then take me. But leave him. He has nothing to do with my past." Al-Mansur's eyes gleamed. "At last, the dog finds his courage. But you misunderstand, old man. This is not just about you, it's about him too. You think it was fate that brought you together? It was blood." Khalid froze. His heart hammered as Al-Mansur's words sank into him. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Al-Mansur laughed, a hollow sound that echoed across the hall. "Ask him. Ask the man you shelter like a father. Ask him why his sons disappeared." Khalid turned to Yusuf, searching his face. The old man's eyes wavered, as though a dam inside him had finally cracked. My sons, Yusuf began, his voice trembling. They were taken. One killed. One lost. And one, his gaze lifted, locking onto Khalid. One survived. The silence that followed was heavier than any gunfire. Khalid's breath caught in his chest, his hands curling into fists. What are you saying? Yusuf's voice broke. You are my son. The world seemed to collapse around him. For years, Khalid had built his empire on the foundation of self-reliance, on the belief that he owed nothing to anyone. But here was the truth, raw and unbearable. His bloodline had not been erased. It had survived, hidden in shadows, carried in the frail body of the man he had rescued by chance. Or perhaps by fate. Al-Mansur's smile widened at the revelation. Beautiful, isn't it? You protected him, and all along he was yours. But now you must choose, Khalid. Stand by him and watch your empire burn, or give him to me and remain king. The choice pressed down on him like the desert sun. His empire or his blood. His crown or his father. For the first time, Khalid felt fear, not for himself, but for the old man who had just given him back the past he never knew he had lost. Lower your weapons, Khalid commanded, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. His guards hesitated, glancing at one another, but his tone brooked no defiance. Slowly the rifles dropped. Then Khalid stepped forward, positioning himself between Yusuf and Al-Mansur. I have made my choice, he said, his voice echoing through the marble halls. And I choose blood over gold. I choose loyalty over fear. Al-Mansur's expression darkened. Then you have chosen death. Before another word could be spoken, the thunder of reinforcements filled the hall. Elite palace guards stormed in from the side corridors, shields raised, weapons ready. Al-Mansur's men faltered, caught between their master's fury and the overwhelming force now pressing against them. Chaos exploded again, shouts, gunfire, glass breaking. Khalid shielded Yusuf with his own body, the weight of this revelation surging in his chest. The old man gripped his arm with trembling fingers, whispering through the storm. You are my son, Khalid. Whatever happens now, never forget, you are more than your empire. Khalid held his father close as the palace descended into battle, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to have something worth losing. The chapter ends with fire, betrayal, and the most shocking revelation of all. Khalid is not just protecting a stranger, he has been protecting his own father. Smoke lingered in the grand hall long after the gunfire had stopped. Shattered glass crunched beneath boots, and the scent of gunpowder clung to the air like a ghost refusing to leave. Khalid stood amid the wreckage, his chest heaving, his suit torn at the sleeve, but his grip on Yusuf remained unshaken. Around them, guards moved swiftly to detain the surviving intruders. Al-Mansur was gone, vanished into the chaos like a serpent retreating to the shadows. But his laughter still echoed in Khalid's mind. You are more than your empire. Those had been Yusuf's words before the battle raged. Now, as silence crept back into the palace, Khalid realized how little those words had prepared him for what followed. By dawn, the press was already circling like vultures. Headlines flooded the airwaves. Attack on Al Rahman Palace. Rival magnates suspected in assault. But none of them knew the truth, the revelation that had shattered Khalid's soul. He had spent his entire life rejecting the notion of weakness, of family ties that could drag a man down. His father had been a nameless shadow in his memory, someone he assumed was buried under the weight of history. And yet, here he was. Alive. Fragile. Broken. And Khalid's blood. The board of directors gathered that afternoon in the damaged palace, their suits immaculate despite the chaos outside. They spoke in clipped, urgent tones, their fear masked by arrogance. This cannot continue, Khalid, one of them said sharply. Your stubbornness has invited enemies into the heart of your empire. Investors are panicking. You must send him away. He is my father, Khalid said, his voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the room. The men exchanged uneasy glances. One finally sneered. Blood does not change the risk he brings. Do you wish to destroy everything we've built? Khalid rose from his chair, his towering presence silencing the room. What I have built was not with your cowardice. It was with loyalty, with sacrifice, with vision. If you cannot stand by me now, then leave. I will build anew without you. His words hung like a blade in the air. Some lowered their eyes, others clenched their fists, but none dared speak again. That night, Khalid found Yusef sitting in the gardens, the moonlight falling gently across his weathered face. He sat with his cane across his lap, his hands trembling. I didn't want you to know this way, Yusef whispered. I thought, perhaps it was better if you never knew. You had a kingdom. You had power. Why should I drag you into the ruins of my past? Khalid sat beside him, his chest heavy with emotions he had never allowed himself to feel. Because a man without roots is a man without truth. I lived thinking I was alone in this world. That everything I created was born of my own hand. But now, I see I was wrong. Yusef turned to him, tears glistening in his eyes. Your mother, she wanted you safe. After they killed her, I searched. I searched until the world swallowed me whole. And when I found nothing, I broke. They left me with nothing but shame. Khalid's hand tightened around his father's. You found me again. That is enough. But peace would not come so easily. The next morning, a fire ripped through one of Khalid's factories. Arson clearly. Panic spread among his employees. Stock prices dipped. The empire trembled under the weight of rumor and fear. Khalid stood at the ruins, watching flames devour steel. The air reeked of smoke, but all he could smell was betrayal. Al-Mansur was striking again, tearing away at everything he had built, piece by piece. And yet, the old man's presence beside him gave Khalid something he had never felt in battle, purpose beyond power. That evening, Yusef approached Khalid in his study. His voice carried both weariness and resolve. You must not let me be your downfall. If giving me up spares your empire, then do it. I have lived long enough in shadows. I can vanish again. Khalid slammed his fist against the desk, the sound echoing like thunder. No. Do you not see? My empire is not just buildings, wealth, and glass towers. It is the people who believe in me. And if I abandon you now, I abandon the very soul of what I claim to stand for. Yusef's eyes searched his son's face. Then you must be ready to fight not as a CEO, but as a man. Because this war will not be fought with money alone. The storm came sooner than expected. At midnight, Khalid was awakened by the blaring of alarms. Security stormed his room, reporting another breach. But this time, it was not just saboteurs. It was Al-Mansur himself. Khalid rushed into the hall, his heart pounding, and there, at the far end, stood the scarred magnate, flanked by armed men. His voice carried like poison through the palace. You could have ended this, Khalid. Give me the old man, and I will leave you the ashes of your kingdom. Refuse, and tonight, blood will stain these halls again. Yusef stepped forward, frail yet unyielding. Take me and leave my son. But Khalid moved faster, placing himself between them, his eyes blazing. You will not touch him. Not while I breathe. Al-Mansur's lips curled into a snarl. Then breathe your last. The palace erupted in chaos once more. Gunfire split the silence, guards clashed, and the marble floor became a battlefield. Khalid fought alongside his men, his tailored suit stained with sweat and blood, his will harder than steel. In the corner of the chaos, Yusef struggled to remain standing, gripping his cane, refusing to cower. He shouted over the battle, Khalid, remember, you are not just an empire. You are flesh, blood, son. Khalid's chest surged with fire. And as he met Al-Mansur in the clash of eyes across the hall, he knew the war was no longer about power. It was about legacy. And in that instant, with bullets flying and enemies pressing, Khalid felt clarity. He would not allow his empire to fall. But more than that, he would not allow his father's story to end in shame. This battle was not just for survival. It was for redemption. The night felt endless, painted in fire and gunpowder. The palace that once echoed with the calm hum of wealth now roared with chaos. Khalid stood at the center of it, his shirt torn, blood seeping from a shallow cut across his brow. Around him, his men fought with desperate ferocity. Yet his eyes never left the figure across the hall, Almansor, scarred, unyielding, and smiling as though death itself obeyed him. "You cannot win," Almansor shouted over the thunder of gunfire. "I have already burned your empire. By sunrise, you will be a man with nothing." Khalid's chest heaved, his heart pounding like the desert drums of his ancestors. "I still have something you will never understand," he answered. His voice carried not just to Almansor, but to every soul in the palace. Blood, loyalty, family. At his side, Yusef leaned against a shattered column, trembling but unbroken. His cane had snapped in half, discarded, and though his body was frail, his eyes glowed with the fire of the truth revealed. "You are my son," he had whispered hours earlier. And now, in the storm of betrayal, those words became Khalid's shield. The clash came to a head. Almansor charged forward, a pistol raised, his men covering him like shadows. Khalid met him halfway, tackling him with the raw power of a man who had built empires with his own hands. The gun clattered across the floor, sliding into the chaos. They fought like animals, grappling, striking, rage against rage. Khalid's fists slammed into the scarred man's jaw, but Almansor answered with his own fury, his laughter breaking into snarls. "You fight for a broken old man." Almansor spat. "Is this what your billions have come to?" Khalid pinned him to the ground, his knuckles bloodied, his teeth clenched. "I fight for my father. And that makes me richer than you will ever be." With one final blow, Almansor's body went limp, his head striking the marble floor. Silence rippled through the chaos. His men faltered, their master defeated, and in moments, palace guards swarmed, disarming and dragging them away. The war was over. But victory carried its own cost. Khalid stumbled to his feet, his chest heaving, and turned to find Yusef collapsed near the column. His frail body trembled, his breath ragged. Khalid rushed to him, falling to his knees, cradling the old man in his arms. "Stay with me," Khalid whispered, his voice breaking for the first time in years. "Please, Baba. Stay." Yusef's hand, thin and trembling, lifted to Khalid's face. He smiled, weak but proud. "You called me Baba." Tears blurred Khalid's vision. "Because you are. You always were. I just didn't know." Yusef coughed, his voice fading. "And now you do. You built an empire of glass and steel. But tonight, you built something greater. You built a heart. Don't let it break, my son." Khalid pressed his forehead to his father's, his arms tightening around him. "I won't. Not ever." For a moment, the world shrank to just them, the billionaire's son and the forgotten father, reunited in the ruins of a war neither had chosen, but both had survived. Days later, the palace was repaired, the walls standing proud again, though scars remained in marble and memory alike. Khalid addressed his board in the great hall, his presence commanding, his father seated quietly at his side. "The empire stands," Khalid declared. "Not because of profits or buildings or numbers on a screen. It stands because of loyalty, because of blood, because I will never abandon those who are mine." The directors shifted uneasily, but none spoke against him. The world had seen the attack, the loyalty of Khalid's men, the resilience of his rule. Stock prices recovered, and whispers of betrayal turned into awe. But for Khalid, none of that mattered. What mattered sat beside him, a frail old man, finally honored, no longer forgotten. Weeks passed, and Khalid often found himself walking the palace gardens with Yusef. The desert wind carried the scent of jasmine, the stars burned bright above, and for the first time, the silence felt peaceful. One evening, Yusef placed a hand on Khalid's arm. "You are not just a ruler of men, Khalid. You are a son. Never forget that." Khalid nodded, his eyes glistening. "And you are not just a ghost of the past. You are my blood. My father." The story of Khalid al-Rahman spread far beyond Dubai. News outlets called him the CEO who defied power for loyalty. But among his people, another title took root, the son who chose blood over gold. It was no longer just about his empire. It was about the legacy he had chosen to build, one that wealth could never buy. As the sun set on the horizon, Khalid stood on the balcony, his father beside him. The empire stretched endlessly before them, towers gleaming, lights burning against the desert night. And for the first time in his life, Khalid felt whole. He had faced betrayal. He had survived war. He had chosen loyalty over fear. And he had found his father. Khalid turned to Yusuf, his voice steady but soft. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Yusuf smiled, tears glinting in the starlight. "Together, my son. Always." The desert wind carried their words away, but the bond remained, unbreakable, eternal. And so ended the story of the billionaire Arab CEO who thought he had everything, until life gave him the one thing he never knew he had lost. If this story moved you, remember this: true wealth is not measured in gold or glass towers, but in the courage to choose love, loyalty, and blood. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who believes that even in the darkest storms, family can light the way.